right, welcome into another edition of Talkin Ducks. Oregon escapes a close one on the road against Wisconsin, but they remain 11-0 for just the second time in school history. We'll give you our thoughts on that game. Also, we'll set the stage. Big Ten championship game. That's going to be coming up for Oregon. Who will they play? Thoughts on maybe some early potential matchups. And then, of course, the Huskies loom in 2 weeks. We'll start to look at that game and how important it is for Oregon to exact some revenge on the Huskies. Let's go ahead and meet the rest of the group here. We've got Aaron Fentress from the Oregonian, Anthony Newman, and Joey Harrington. And listen, guys, I'm watching this fourth quarter in Colorado Springs. I just got done calling a game where the Beavers got shut out 28-0. Yes. And Oregon is trailing. And you see this 4th and 9 as soon as the fourth quarter comes up. Dillon Gabriel rolls to his left, and as the Wisconsin fans are still jumping around, they complete one of the most clutch fourth down passes I've ever seen, and they go on to win this game. And while, Joey, it wasn't pretty by any stretch of the imagination, this was their 8th straight game. We had talked about this game back in August. This was going to be the one to highlight. Watch out for it, and they get the dub.
Yeah, I mean, this was the one that we had all circled on the calendar for a whole host of reasons. And then, I don't know, taking our foot off the gas a little bit and said, yeah, all those things still exist. The pressure of November, going to Madison, jump around, 70-some thousand people, but they're good enough to win. Look, this was the quintessential late November college football game. And we've hit the point of the season where it's less about how you win and just the fact that you win. It's ugly. So what? Oh well. You're sitting there at 11-0. You got a week to get healthy, and you did not exactly what you needed to do, but you won, and that's the only thing that matters results-wise at this point.
Yeah, and Anthony, again, 8th straight game. You're at Madison. You see how crazy that crowd is. Wisconsin doing an excellent job of being able to run the ball, and their defense did a great job in that game and just creating a lot of havoc for the Ducks to deal with. And we've seen Oregon lose these types of games before, right? Where it is late November. You're on the cusp, and all of a sudden you trip up. This win, even though it was ugly, how impressive was it for you for them to do this with everything we had just mentioned?
Really impressive. It's hard to go undefeated. I mean, you don't see a lot of teams doing it. And then I think good football teams, they find a way to win. They make the plays when they need to make the plays when it counts. Yeah, you're struggling first quarter, okay, you look good. The second quarter, you're struggling the third quarter, but you find a way to win the football game. Yes, it's ugly. It doesn't look good, but your back's against the wall. You're still fighting to the end, and you won. That's impressive to me.
All right, Aaron. And I know everyone's getting their keyboards out here in just a second for whatever your response is going to be here. So I'm going to phrase it for you like this. This close win against Wisconsin, are you more impressed with Oregon, the fact that they gutted this out? Or does this make you concerned about Oregon? Yes, they're 11-0, but you barely beat Wisconsin, and look at all the other teams in the playoff. Which side do you take here?
I'm right on the fence, man. I'm surfing that fence. Woo! All right, listen. We're going to talk about red flags later, okay? So I'll save that stuff. For now, though, what Newman just said is correct. It is tough to go undefeated. Oregon's only done it once ever, right? And even that season, 2010, they needed a Cliff Harris punt return to beat mediocre Cal 15-13, right? And that was a 12-0 team.
Too.
2014, the team that went to the national championship game, yes, they lost to Arizona. That was right in the window when they had major offensive line problems. There also was a game before that where they went to Washington State and won 38-31. That was the day Marcus threw 5 touchdowns with 4 incompletions. Remember that? 300-something yards. So they needed him to be a miracle worker to survive that day, right? Everyone knows I'm a Miami fan. I go back to 2001, arguably the greatest team ever. They barely won at Boston College. They needed an Ed Reed pick 6 when Boston College was in the red zone to upset them in the final minutes of the game. So, yeah, for that reason only, that you're going to have a team that's going to rise up a little bit. You're going to have a bad day. And if you're on the road, especially like Marcus was and like Oregon was in 2010 and like Miami was against Boston College, you got to find a way to figure it out. And they did. So you give them total credit for that. That said, this just reinforced to me everything I've been saying the whole time, that this is a really good team that's in the mix of about 8 teams that could win it, but they're very, very beatable in that group. Not against teams with bad quarterbacks. In that group, they're beatable. And I think this game showed that. That said, they found a way on the road to get it done. You got to give them props for that.
And I think the other thing, too, that people have to realize as well, and I'm sure they do, this 8-week stretch, Joey, this wasn't, hey, the first 8 weeks of the season where maybe you've got 2 somewhat easy non-conference games, and then you play 5 legitimate games and you have a bye. These were 8 legit games for Oregon. Conference games, big name opponents, big emotional games as well too throughout this stretch that they go and get this victory at the end of. And really the maturity of this team. And I think the fact that this is their 3rd game now, Boise State, Ohio State, and Wisconsin, Joey, and you're one that's been very familiar with comebacks, that they trailed by a touchdown in the 4th quarter. And is there something about teams that just have it in their DNA to have that confidence when their back is up against the wall, they're on the road, just to be able to calm themselves and make more plays down the stretch? We saw that offensively and defensively on Saturday night.
Yeah, I mean, I think that speaks to the leadership of not just Dan and his coaching staff, but the leadership on the field, right? You never saw Dylan press. You never saw him stress. You didn't see him forcing. Yes, he threw the pick, early in the game on the goal line, but you didn't see him forcing balls later in the game, trying to get it all back in one fell swoop. Like this is a team that has good leadership, right? Good, experienced players that know how to deal with these situations. And yeah, I mean, I think Aaron is pretty spot on in that there are things that we will talk about later on in the show. There are some weaknesses that need to be addressed in some way or another. But like you said, to go 8 weeks and play Ohio State, a ranked Illinois, at Michigan, at Wisconsin, that's a tough stretch of games for 19 and 20-year-old kids to play. 8 weeks in a row is a slog. And while it wasn't all against, those 7 or 8 teams that have a chance in the playoff, there were some quality opponents in there that combined with some of the injuries and some of the things that have happened, it's an accomplishment to get through this stretch.
Let's add this.
Go ahead.
Let's add this. You don't have Tez Johnson. You don't have Jordan Birch. You lost an offensive lineman, Harper. I mean, what else? I mean, come on. You're not playing with some of your best players on the field, and you still find a way to win when it's ugly. That, to me, is a sign of a good football team. Okay, real quick.
6 of those wins came against the bottom half of the conference, and those teams are a combined 12-33. Let's not get it twisted, all right? They feasted on the bottom half of the Big Ten. Ohio State win legit. Illinois is a pretty good team. But again, 12-33 combined with all these teams you're talking about how tough they are and they had to go on the road and blah, blah, blah. None of them has a quarterback who can beat you.
Hold on. I didn't give the whole list. I said on an 8-game stretch, there's some going to Michigan and going to Wisconsin. Those are 2, difficult road trips. But yeah, you're right. Like Maryland, they're at the bottom half of the conference. But it's more just the over the course of 8 weeks. Like that's a long stretch. And yeah, you're right. It wasn't, you weren't playing Ohio State and Penn State and Indiana every single week, but Ohio State at Michigan, Illinois,
right,
at Wisconsin over the course of a stretch.
Ohio State played Oregon, Penn State, and Indiana.
Yeah, and they lost a game. I mean, like that.
They lost to Oregon.
Yep. They lost by 1 point at Oregon.
Wait, 1 point or 1,000 points? They lost.
Well, and Joey, Anthony, and Aaron, listen, you've been around the game as well too. I think it's more so the 8 consistent weeks of class football, that number 1 ranking on your back. You're getting every team's best game. Just mentally being able to be focused and locked in 8 weeks in a row to play assignment correct football. We don't even see NFL teams do that.
No.
And so for this Oregon
That's
team
because
to do
there's
that, and
parity
get
in the
this win
NFL.
At the tail end of it. So what?
That's because there's parity in the NFL. Go ahead. Sorry.
Parity in college with the transfer portal now. Tell me that
Not in this. Not in this.
You have,
Not in this conference. When you play
you
six
got
of the
BYU
nine
and
worst
Arizona
teams.
State in a playoff elimination game next week. Who had that on their bingo card?
What's
There's
that?
parity in this sport because of the transfer portal. Talk
we're
about
not-
Miami, your boys.
We're
with
talking
Cam
about
Ward.
we're talking
Where
about
would
in
they have
this
been without
conference
him?
whom they played. They played 6 of the worst 9 teams in the conference. That's
They don't
it's
play the
okay. You guys
parity.
can pump it
I'm
up.
not,
That's what
I'm
you
not
do.
disagreeing
you
with
guys
you, Aaron.
pump it up,
I'm
and I'll
not
bring it back
disagreeing with
down
you
a
on
little
that.
bit.
What I'm saying is, in
I got
the
you,
three of
Finches.
us here in college, when you go practice game week after week, and sometimes playing those bottom teams is almost harder because you got to get up for the game. Naturally, you can't get up for it. So you're trying to get up for every single opponent, even though you're every team's best game, you're going to get their best shot. That gets draining after a while. I don't care what the level of competition is. There's something mentally about doing that while you're beat up, while you're banged up, and the fact that they navigated that and got the win at the end of it, Aaron, at the end, not game 4, not game 5, but the end, says a lot, regardless of who they played.
Says a lot.
Next segment before I get fired up. Stick around when we come back. We're going to talk about the
got him,
jump around
Finches.
strategy that Dan Lanning unleashed. Is another stroke of genius for the Wonderkin coach? We'll let you know when we come back on Talkin Ducks. All right, welcome back to Talkin Ducks. We've calmed down, we've taken some deep breaths, and now we move along to another strategy from Dan Lanning. And this was preparing his team for the fourth quarter in Madison, Wisconsin, where, as many of you learned, or if you hadn't been familiar with, they do jump around, which is right in that same tier as Shout at Oregon in that fourth quarter, as far as the stadium raising the volume and all the fans getting crazy for this fourth quarter. Now, Aaron, Dan Lanning revealed that they had played jump around all week long and had told the team to join in. And you saw shots of the Duck players jumping around as they were getting set to face a 4th and 9 on the road trailing in this madhouse. Your thoughts on this approach from Oregon, as we heard Pavlov's experiment here with Dan Lanning about being able to tune it up in the fourth quarter?
Right. So I would be interested to know how many teams get intimidated by things like that. It doesn't seem like many would. That said, if you know that's coming, right? If you know that burst of Wisconsin pride and it's going to be loud and it's going to be crazy, if you know that's coming in the game, and you can prepare your players to not only expect it, but embrace it and join in, right? Everyone knows that song. Whenever I hear that song, I think of the beginning of Mrs. Doubtfire, when the late, great Robin Williams is dancing with his son at his birthday party to that song, right? So it's a fun song. And so if you know it's coming and you've been hearing it all week and then it happens, you're like, hey guys, we get to, and your coach gives you permission to jump around and enjoy it, it's going to have zero impact on you. And it may actually fire you up as well, because you're joining in with your teammates, with their crowd, and it's not going to intimidate you. I don't know if it ever would have, but still, it's a positive to make it something that you embrace.
Anthony, your thoughts?
Yeah, this is a game, correct? And they're young kids, young men. Have fun. And that's what Dan Lanning wants. He wants the guys to have fun playing a game. Play smart, be responsible, but let's have some fun. And you guys been out in the stadium. Okay, you've seen the visitors during the Shout video. They're dancing too. I see them. I'm in the press box looking right down on them. I see those guys, the visiting team, dancing all the time. So, yes, why not? I mean, I like to dance. Every time I hear music, I'm going to dance. But yet, okay, when the whistle blows, I'm going to knock somebody out. It's that simple.
Joey.
Yeah, I love it. I mean,
Put yourself in Dylan's shoes. You're getting ready to stare down a 4th and 9. You know the ball's going to be in your hands. What's going to help you turn the corner from the third quarter to the fourth quarter with all that going on?
well, I didn't see Dylan dancing, was he?
No, I don't think he was there.
It was the guys on the sideline.
He's the one guy saying, hey, hold on. Let's get this play call in here, player.
Yeah. I mean, I think Fentress, again, was spot on this. No one's going to get intimidated by it. But if you are prepared, especially at that moment, 4th and 9, that massive rush of energy coming from the stands, the student section, if you're able to use that for your own advantage, Awesome. Great. Yeah, I love it. I got no problem with it. I personally wouldn't necessarily be dancing right before a 4th and 9. Well, I wouldn't be dancing at all just because I'm not like Newman and I don't do a whole lot of dancing. But
He wouldn't be dancing before anything and anything. We'll just put it that way.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, Joey, how about this, though? Oregon, late in the game, they're trying to salt it away. They go with the fake field goal, and they come up short in that situation. Your thoughts on a bit of that daring call in that situation? We've seen Lanning not be afraid to really do something bold late game, but in that situation, is that one where you kick the field goal, or do you not fault it because the look kind of was there?
Look, I think the best way to come at this, at least for me right now, is we know who Dan is, right? We know who he is, and we know the type of game that he's going to call, and we've seen the type of calls that he's going to make in those situations. So, first of all, it shouldn't be surprising. The only thing that I would be curious to know about, because, yeah, you're right. I mean, you look at that look, if, tight end doesn't release wide and stays up inside, that's a block, and all of a sudden it's the greatest call in history. I'm curious about the lead up to it, right? If you knew you were going to be going for it on 4th down, what's the thought process that goes in? Because if I remember correctly, they ran the ball 3 times leading up to it, right? Is that a 4-down situation? Because and it's funny, our friend George Reister had an interesting point about this. Being up 6 is almost the worst thing that I don't like that, right? Because you almost get a little complacent, right? You allow them to kind of chunk away, just saying that you just can't get up a touchdown. Whereas there's a sense of urgency if you're only up 3. I'm curious to know if it was a 4-down situation that whole time, right? If he's going into it thinking, I don't know. I don't have any problem with it because we know who he is. We know the decision that was made based on the look that he saw. I would be curious to be a fly on the wall to know the conversation that went on around it.
Yeah, because Aaron, it's one of those things where you get that, you put the game away, essentially. There's no chance for Wisconsin, and obviously we know how this game ended. But in that situation, what are you thinking? I mean, I think to Joey's point, 6 is kind of that number you don't want to be up late in the game because it gives you this false sense of security.
So first of all, every time someone makes a call that's against the grain, everyone overanalyzes it and freaks out. If it works, they're a genius. Sean Payton, Super Bowl against Peyton Manning, onside kick.
Kick.
What? Now it worked, but you risked giving Peyton Manning the ball in great field position. Had it not worked and Manning throws a touchdown, you're an idiot. But it worked, you're a genius, right? We know how Lanning rolls. He said it. Even at the UW game when they failed on all those 4th downs, he said, we're an aggressive program. This is what we do. It didn't work, but this is what I do. And you can't cry about that, but then go, oh my God, he's amazing because he kicked an onside kick against UCLA 2 years ago, 3 years ago, whatever it was. And then he kicked directly at the guy at Ohio State, right? This is how he rolls. But when you look at this, it's not a bad risk because if you believe the look is there, and that's where coaching comes in, right? Is the defensive look there? Is this play there? If we just do this, it's money. And it was there, but the wide guy went too wide. It's almost like he thought it was a sweep, right? And not hitting basically the C gap. And so he didn't block straight ahead. Although he does that, it might have been a 20-yard run, right? But if you don't get it, what's the worst case scenario, right? They can drive and kick a field goal to tie or a touchdown to win. But their offense was booty, which is what we're going to get to later. So the odds of that happening weren't very good. So when you balance it all out, try it. If you get it, game over. If you don't, you feel pretty good about stopping them anyway. Also, you kick a field goal, they could block the field goal. Those things happen. Or you get the field goal, you go up six, you kick off, they could get a great return. Like there's all sorts of things that are in play there. So I had no problem with the call. It was gutsy. It was there. They just didn't quite get it. And of course they won anyway.
Also, Dan Lanning.
They go up by how many, Aaron?
What's that?
They go up by how many if they hit the field goal?
6.
Okay, just making sure. All right, here we go.
What I say?
Also, Dan Lanning believes in his defense. I mean, that's another reason. Hey, I got a defense that can play. I got a defense that's competing in today's game. So that's why I don't have a problem with it.
Well, I just want to follow up, Aaron. I just checked real quick on the college football stats, and Wisconsin has actually offensively they're 41st in passing efficiency and they're 3rd in booty. So, like in terms of like the rankings of categories offensively, you're again spot on that one.
All right, stick around when we come back. We'll talk about the red flags for this Oregon football team. How many does Aaron have that he wants to wave? We'll let you know when we come back on Talkin Ducks. Welcome back to Talkin Ducks. We've already covered it ad nauseum. Oregon 11-0, impressive victory over Wisconsin at the end of 8 straight games. They finally get a bye week. But Aaron, you teased us at the top of the show. There are some red flags with this Oregon team. Maybe it begins with back-to-back games under 400 yards of offense. But where are your concerns? Because I think it is fair. There's no juggernaut in college football this year. I think anybody in the top 8 teams could beat anybody on any given day. But where are the concerns specifically with this Oregon team right now?
Well, I think they're the same as they've been all season, and I've talked about it, and other people have mentioned it, that, you know, this team is in the mix. And again, I'm nitpicking in terms of winning the national championship. I'm not nitpicking in terms of going to the playoffs or maybe winning a playoff game. We're not talking about that. Obviously, clearly, this is a really good football team. But they have played a ton of teams with really bad quarterback play. Had Wisconsin had a solid to good quarterback, I think Oregon loses that game. That kid just could not step up at home when opportunities were there. He's just not at that level yet. And if you look at all the quarterbacks they've played, almost all of them in the last 8 games have had passer ratings of 130 or less. Their combined touchdown interception ratio is 67 to 52. They're just kids who are just not ready to play at that level. So my question is, what's going to happen when they play against teams that actually can produce offense from the pocket, like Ohio State, where they were able to move the ball, 400 plus yards of offense, quarterback threw for 300, 2 touchdowns, et cetera, and they were in position to win it if not for the offensive PI, which was a legit call, but still. So going into a playoff situation or even going into the Big Ten championship, they're going to face things that they've only really seen once this season, and they almost lost that game. So that's my thing. Like, yes, they pulled it out. Yes, they won. They won at Michigan. It's inconceivable how bad Michigan's passing game was. So those are the red flags for me. So I give credit to the defense to a certain point, but Newman knows as a high school coach with a stacked team, the difference between having a great defense and playing a high school kid who can't throw the ball 40 yards. You know how to defend that guy. You know he can't do anything to you, and you're going to dominate him. And you know as a coach has to make your defense great. You just know the quarterback is not competent. And so I've seen a lot of that in the last few weeks, and we're going to see how they do when they play a string of teams that can move the ball from the pocket.
Anthony.
Well, yeah, I am. I'm very excited when I see a team doesn't have a good quarterback.
Yeah, you do.
Because I know my defensive line's about to eat.
And if he throws it's going to be a floater and you're going to pick it.
I'm going to send the house. Yeah, I understand that, but you know, hey, it's not Oregon's fault. The team that's coming up to play, that's who they are. That's what they have, and Oregon's doing what they need to do. Punish a team that doesn't have a quarterback. Bottom line, you still got to play offense, defense, and special teams. And when I look at Oregon, I think there's 3 phases of this team that are really good. That's offense, defense, and special teams. So you're not just playing the offense or just playing the defense. When Oregon's offense is hot, you better look out. And then special teams. With Tez Johnson, he gets healthy, punt returns, Noah Winnington, kickoff returns, special teams get points. And then the defense. So I think that's why it's hard when you play a team like Oregon, could be a Georgia, Alabama in the past, that they have all 3 phases that are very good. And when one suffers a little bit, the other teams pick them up. And it's hard to play a team for 4 quarters that have 3 phases that are good.
Okay, Jordan, I'm gonna insert here. I agree with Fentress for the majority of what you've said. The thing that makes it different for me this year is that, and we talked about it at the beginning of the year, college football has evolved to the point that you're not, even Nick Saban at the end of his career there at Alabama wasn't shutting down those, they were playing the national championship game and they were 38, 35, 40-point games, right? They were high scoring, football games. So that's the nature of college football. So when you play in Ohio State, like that's going to happen even if you have a good defense. What gives me a little bit more I guess what makes me feel better is the fact that they did shut those other guys down, right? If you're giving up, if instead you're saying, instead of saying whatever it was, 67 to 52 touchdown to interception ratio, if we're saying it was 83 to 10, like now we got an issue, because what you're doing is you're allowing those really below average teams, below average quarterbacks to play well. Like this is
No. That was the ratio of those quarterbacks combined on the season.
Yes, I guess my
52.
point is though, I guess my point is that if those guys are still having good days against you, or having All-American type days against you, then I would be concerned. College football is a different beast now, offensively, defensively, and I can also say, that you're right in that this isn't a dominant defense that is going to get challenged, by those 8 teams in the college football playoff. Yeah, I do think that there are other red flags for me right now, which, on the offensive side of the ball, which I don't know what we're looking like commercial-wise. Jordan, you tell me if that's next segment or right now.
So it is next segment, so let's go ahead and take a break right now, so we got plenty of meat on the bone. When we come back, we'll talk about this college football playoff, whether or not Oregon's a lock at this point, regardless of what happens, and look at some of the matchups for Oregon. Who might they play that might have such a great quarterback that Fentress will love? We'll let you know when we come back. All right, welcome back to Talkin Ducks. We're going to get to the college football playoff here in just a second. Did Oregon already punch their ticket, matchups? But one member of our panel still has some red flags for these Oregon Ducks, and their name does not rhyme with Mentress. It is Joey Harrington. Joey, your thoughts about this team? There's still some concerns as we have a couple weeks left.
Yeah, we had a conversation a couple weeks ago about the injuries to Tez and to DeMarcus Harper, and I think we all said they're going to be good enough to get by and potentially thrive. They've been good enough to get by, but there's something missing. I mean, there is a level of comfort. For 2 weeks now, we have seen an offense that doesn't necessarily have a rhythm, right? They've got big playability. They can go down the field to Holden. They can go down the field to Evan Stewart. Like they can get the ball down the field. They're still explosive. But with Ferguson, I mean, pretty much on one leg. I mean, the guy was not healthy. Tez Johnson, I mentioned it last week. Against Maryland, there was a play where Justice Lowe and Dylan Gabriel, I mean, it was a sure first down, but they weren't on the same page. Like, we're missing that, bump, 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 because Tez is gone. And I think we overestimated the ability of the other guys in the room to fill a role that isn't necessarily quantifiable, right? It's a feeling, it's a connection that a quarterback and a receiver builds. I also look at this game against Wisconsin, and how many times did I see Dylan Gabriel break contain? How many times did I have to see him scramble? How many times did I have to see him, that throw to Ferguson, incredible throw and catch, but had to get outside the pocket. Why is he having to get outside the pocket? Because they're shifting guys around, and it's not like this massive thing like we saw at the start of the year where he's getting sacked and it's becoming an issue that has to be addressed. But it's enough of a thorn that it makes a difference, right? So when you combine those two things, where Dylan is having to flesh out of the pocket more often than he wants. And in those situations, he doesn't have his safety blanket. He doesn't have his Keenan Howery. He doesn't have his, whoever it is. Like, that's a little concerning for me, especially as you start. Now, were they able to get by a bad Maryland team and an average Wisconsin team on the road? Sure, they were. But if this is something that continues, that's going to be an area of concern for me. If this is something that gets to the Big Ten championship game, and even this week against Washington, this is something that has me more concerned than I was initially thinking 2 weeks ago when it happened.
Well, fortunately, you have the bye week, and hopefully that gives Oregon a chance to get a little bit healthier, take care of some of those bumps and bruises. Maybe you get a body back. But I think this speaks to a bigger picture here, Aaron, is that, yes, Oregon is 11-0. They've clinched a spot in the college football playoff. Many people think you win this game against Washington, you're a lock for the college football playoff in a sense. And, they clinched a spot in the Big Ten championship game. it still feels very important, which kind of seems like common sense, for the Ducks to win out and get that number 1 overall seed, because now you go from having to win 2 games to get to the championship game versus you now have to host a game, and it just gives you one more opportunity against these top teams that have these great quarterbacks there. And so you look at the current bracket for Oregon, I imagine a huge sense of urgency to close out these next 2 games and to get that number 1 overall spot.
Oh, definitely. I mean, there's no doubt about that at all. To play 3 rather than 4 in the playoffs, to be on that side of the bracket where you're not going to get, the best teams over there as you would if you were 3 or 4. Yeah, it's huge. And plus, just to put a nail in the coffin to prove that you are who voters believe you are. And if you are, you're going to take care of Washington. And that shouldn't even be an issue, really. If I'm Washington, I might not even show up after what Washington has done to Oregon the past couple of years. I imagine Dan Lanning wants to drop a 40, 50-point blowout on them. And then, of course, whatever happens in the Big Ten championship happens. I think that's going to be a coin toss game, no matter who they play. But winning it, you're the number 1 seed, period. And so, yeah, I think it's definitely huge that they close that out, because that lessens how tough the road's going to be to win this thing, which I think is going to be tough, not just for Oregon. I mean, this isn't just about Oregon. If I were talking Tennessee, talking Crimson Tide, I'd be saying the same thing. Like, there's just this pool of teams that are all just together, and it's going to be a coin toss almost every week.
Well, and Anthony, with that, if Oregon doesn't win this Big Ten title game, correct me if I'm wrong, they're dropping out of the top 4 buys. That's going to go to the highest rated conference champion, which is going to be potentially in Ohio State or Indiana. Anthony, now you're talking, you might be a 5, 6, or 7 seed, but all of a sudden what's looming there is a first-round matchup, even though you're hosting it, against possibly Georgia that sneaks in there, or an Ole Miss, if you want to talk about issues with quarterbacks. So to me, it feels like you got to close this out, and this playoff is coming down to matchups. I mean, who do you feel good about Oregon trying to avoid or match up against?
Well,
here?
no, you're right. And, I'm going to say something that Joey will disagree. Oregon controls their own destiny. I mean, they really do. And that's a good place to be in. Hey, guys, let's go win these last couple of football games. Let's go do it. We control our own destiny. No one can beat us. We beat ourselves. So that's a good thing for coaches to tell their kids. But at the same time, guys, and Dan Lanning's going to say another thing. I don't care who we play. We got to beat everybody to win the national championship, regardless. And I get it with the rankings and the brackets and all that. Hey, I'm dealing with it in high school right now. We're a 2 seed. It's pretty good for us because all the good teams are up top. So it's been okay. But the important thing about this is...
Nice flex.
Yeah. The important thing about this is that you have to go into the end of the season healthy. And Joey said it. If you don't have all your dogs, there's some concern. And I always say this, the teams that win a national championship, their best players are healthy. Their best players are playing. Oregon needs those top players playing in the game so then we can see what Oregon can do. If they don't have their best players, then you may see the red flags and we had a chance, but our best players didn't play. And you don't want to say that.
Yeah, it's really interesting how this is going to shake out. BYU's loss throws a huge monkey wrench into everything. There could be a world where the Big 12 champion might get locked out potentially. Right now, Boise State is that 4 seed based upon being one of the highest rated conference champions. So we'll see how it shakes out. But I think the consensus is Oregon needs to get that number 1 seed. There's too many really good teams with 2 or 3 losses in the SEC that you might match up with round 1 if now all of a sudden you fall. Yes, Joey.
Just to reestablish, destiny is predetermined, and therefore you cannot control something that is already predetermined.
Hey, could you imagine, though, Bama coming to Autzen?
I can imagine it,
Dude,
but do you
amazing.
want to see that matchup?
I do.
We would love it. We would feast off of that. But if you're Oregon,
amazing.
I mean, yeah. To me, there's a huge pitfall if you don't win this conference championship game, which obviously we'll talk about later, versus the path just becomes so much easier for Oregon if you can get that conference championship game victory. All right, stick around. Yep, one more time.
The only way that Bama comes to Autzen is if we don't control something that is already predetermined and predestined, and therefore, sorry, go ahead. What were you saying?
Joey hated Star Wars.
All right, we're going to get to Dan Rubenstein next, get his thoughts. Plenty more Talkin Ducks when we come back. Welcome back to Talkin Ducks. We're now joined by our good friend Dan Rubenstein from the Solid Verbal Podcast. And Dan, it was an ugly win on the road for Oregon at Wisconsin, but as I talked about it with the fellas, this was their 8th game in a row. These are those late November games that feels like every championship contender has to get over, and the Ducks finally got over the hump. Your thoughts on this narrow victory?
Yeah, it was an offensive rhythm thing to me that the team looked out of sorts. Wisconsin looked well prepared on defense. The secondary has been pretty much all year the strength of this team, and it showed with the glue that they were able to apply to Oregon's pass catchers, it seemed. Evan Stewart got loose, and they, Dylan Gabriel with the incredible 4th and 9 throw in the second half. Obviously, if not for the interception from Mateo Uiagalelei, maybe the play of the game. But it really was a factor to me of Tez Johnson being an incredibly important piece of this offense. And when he is not sort of giving gravity to this offense and defenses need to stick to him like crazy on every play, they can adjust. And as good as these Oregon receivers are, Tez Johnson is the best receiver and the safety valve for Dylan Gabriel in a way that the others aren't. And I think Oregon's offense will get better whenever it is he's back, but it's almost a scheduled loss that they won, given that they were on the road, given the number of games in a row they had to play, given playing in this environment and it being sort of a last gasp for Wisconsin season, that they got out of there with the win, and with how the defense played at least, I still think a very successful week.
Yeah, very impressive, and now they get the bye week finally. I'm curious, though, a huge matchup in the Big Ten. Indiana, Ohio State, which we never would have said back in August. One of these two teams potentially going to meet Oregon in the Big Ten title game. Your thoughts on this particular game?
I can't wait for it. I think it's going to be stupendous. I hope it will be, because Indiana, with an extra week to prepare now, their biggest game, maybe in program history, it's an interesting case to be made. And Ohio State, with as strong as they've generally looked, Indiana may be a team that can game plan successfully against a beat-up Ohio State offensive line. We saw Josh Simmons, starting left tackle, go out for the season in the game against Oregon. And so, to me, it's going to come down to, what does Indiana do to evolve over the course of this game? We saw an extremely sluggish second half against Michigan a couple weeks ago, and they pulled out that win. Win your clunkers. That's great. But we'll see as Curtis Rourke, Indiana's starting quarterback's hand and thumb, gets healthier and healthier, if he feels more comfortable going downfield against an incredibly difficult Ohio State defense. And I'm curious to see what Ohio State's able to do in the running game against Indiana, because if they can control clock, if they can convert those 3rd and short, it's going to open things up. Indiana just hasn't seen a team with the talent that Ohio State has had. And Ohio State is just a little bit more battle-tested, given that they've played Oregon, given that they've, played a bunch of games in a row now. I think it's going to be great. I think the talent edge obviously goes to Ohio State, but the defense, while incredible for Ohio State, we'll see if they've solved any of those pass rushing issues that they showed against Oregon. Oregon just has a better offensive line, though, against Indiana. I give the edge to Ohio State, but Indiana's had a great year.
All right, well said. Well, it's good to know that there are other teams other than Oregon that have red flags. I'll make sure I relay the message to the fellas.
Every team, every coach, every person, everybody's got red flags. We should all accept that.
All right, Dan, thanks again. I appreciate it. Enjoy the games this weekend, okay?
You
all
too.
Right,
thanks.
Plenty more Talkin Ducks when we come back. Welcome back to Talkin Ducks. Huge thanks to Dan Rubenstein for joining us, of course. Now, Aaron, it's this time of year. Coaches are being let go across college football. NFL coaching chairs are heating up. Apparently, you say there is some buzz around Dan Lanning in some NFL circles.
Well, I'm not reporting the buzz. Other people are talking about it, because this time of year, jobs are being rumored to come open, and everyone looks for the hottest name. Oh, Dan Lanning, that fits. I'm here to actually report first that Dan Lanning will be coaching the Chicago Bears next season. No, I'm just kidding. So here's the deal with this. And this is not a disrespect to Dan Lanning. I don't buy for a second that anyone in the NFL is saying, I want Dan Lanning. One, he hasn't done anything yet. The NFL is a completely different world than college football. And you have to be a dominant guy in college football or be an offensive guru for them to really look at you. That's why someone like Cliff Kingsbury got the job in Arizona, because of the air raid offense and matching him up with Kyler Murray. He didn't have a resume that warranted an NFL head coaching job, but he was an offensive guy. It's very rare that a defensive guy who hasn't won national titles, or at least been in that mix legitimately, gets that kind of look. And the other thing is, the NFL knows that what you're doing in college is completely different than the NFL because you're not going to have 5 first-round picks every year. You're not going to have an unlimited salary cap. Lanning's success right now at Oregon is mostly, and this is not disrespect, don't hate the player, hate the game.
No. I'm ready for this.
Transfer portal and NIL. Most of the
Lanning's
starters,
success at Oregon, Aaron. I just want to make sure we can clip this really well here.
Go ahead.
Lanning's success at Oregon is courtesy of
is
what?
mostly tied to transfer portal and NIL. And that's not a hater statement. That's just a fact. Without that, relying on high school kids, they don't have the record that they've had the last few years. So NFL knows this. They're not going to sit there and say, oh, Dan Lanning's going to come to the NFL and draft deftly and get all these free agents. It just doesn't work that way. So I would say even Kalen DeBoer, because of his offensive acumen, would be a clearer candidate for the NFL than Dan Lanning right now.
Oh, man, they're going to roast you. What? Anthony, any
Facts,
thoughts on
that? Joey played for Saban. Joey played for Saban, saw Saban come to the NFL, look around and go, wait a minute, I can't just get 10 first-round picks? No, and then ran right back to college. Joey?
No, I'm good.
Joey.
Good.
I'm just trusting that the grass is green. That's all I'm trusting.
It is very green. All right. We're going to end it there before my man digs himself any deeper. When we come back, we'll give you our thoughts on the matchup against Washington here in a couple weeks as we close up shop on Talkin Ducks. Welcome back to Talkin Ducks. Time now for our Road to Victory, brought to you by Guarantee Chevrolet. And Joey, it's a bye week, but then you get the Washington Huskies at home. And here's what's on the line. Oregon's only been 12-0 one other time in program history. Oregon is a 20-point favorite as this game opens up at this moment. Dan Lanning 0-3 against Washington in his career at Oregon. There's a lot on the line in this game for the Ducks. Of course, the number 1 overall ranking in the college football playoff as well.
What's the question?
How's this game going to go? Sorry, I didn't get to all that.
Sorry.
It's kind of what we do with this segment
at
the end of the show. We've been doing it for 11 weeks now.
11 years. You said 20-point favorite, and I was like, ooh, I don't know about that. This is I don't know. I want to know if Jordan Burch is back, awesome, great, wonderful. My understanding is Tez and Marcus Harper aren't going to be back. If they're not back, I don't think this is a blowout. I don't. I think that this offense is missing their guys. I think this is a 10-point game. I think this is a 27-17 type of game. I don't know. It's tough for me to see. I have 2 data points against Maryland and Wisconsin where this offense was not explosive without those guys. I have a hard time saying that this is going to be an offensive explosion if I don't have those guys in the lineup. I don't know. That's how
Anthony.
I feel.
Well, I'm just not sold on Washington. Washington's like a shed in your backyard that you haven't walked in 5 years. You walk in, you open the door, you turn on the lights, and all the roaches take off and they hide.
Damn.
Okay? The portal, when they went to the national championship, they went to the national championship. After that, every player took off and every coach took off. So what do you have? What are you dealing with? Washington will be good one day, but right now, I'm not impressed with them. Right now, we're talking about in 2 weeks, they're not going to be the team that's going to stop Oregon. I don't know if it's going to be a blowout, but I don't think it's going to be close.
Did Newman just call the Huskies residents of a roach motel? Is that what I just heard?
Yep, I did. I heard that.
Damn, that's rough. Washington's not good. I'm looking here, 40-16, 31-17 to Indiana, 44-16 was Iowa, 35-6 at Penn State. They played a tougher schedule than Oregon, by the way. But anyway, they can't score on Oregon. So that's why I don't think it's going to be close. I don't think there's any way they get to 20. And I think Oregon will play well enough offensively to be in the high 30s. So I'm looking 38-17, something like that. Plus, there's no way the players who are still here from last year and Dan Lanning do not want to drop a bomb on those guys. I expect motivation to be sky high. Plus, the motivation to go undefeated and finish this thing right and get into the Big Ten championship game where, like we just talked about, they need to win. So I think it's going to be not a monumental blowout, but I think they handle them pretty easily.
Yeah, I think so too. The fact that it's senior day, you've never beat the Huskies, You're coming off a bye week. You're going to be fresh. Autzen Stadium is going to be rocking for this game. I think there's no extra motivation needed for the Ducks. They're going to come with that juice. As long as they play a clean game, shouldn't have an issue at all with the Huskies. All right, that'll do it for this edition of Talkin Ducks. It's a bye week for Oregon next week. We still got you covered, though. And then when we get set for this matchup against Washington, we'll bring you some even more hard-hitting information, more than Fentress even brings on a daily basis. So thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next week.
Lanning to the Bears.